The UK paying reparation to Nigeria will be a recipe for disaster. Most Nigerians do not want reparation money from the UK for these reasons. Lately, the topic of reparations for historical injustices from the colonial masters who enslaved African ancestors many years ago has taken the forefront in the current news in the UK. While many want the current government to start by apologizing on behalf of their predecessors who wronged West Africans by enslaving them, the UK government, on the other hand, is hesitant to apologize because admitting the wrongdoing of their predecessors will translate into a willingness to inherit the wrongdoing, as well as the need to compensate or offer reparation. The UK government doesn't want to fall into the trap, seeing that those who did these and those who wronged have all been gone. Owning their awful sins will be dire for the UK financially because the amount being requested for, as reparation, is outrageously impossible for the UK to pay. Who is eligible for reparation? Secondly, the people asking for reparation are not considered direct recipients of the wrong done. So, who will be receiving the said money? Will it be the descendants of slaves? But who are these descendants? Will it go to the countries where slaves were taken from? While the Caribbeans are pushing for it, the UK government is trading so carefully that you may see it as an absolute silence to the case. The British argument. Do not forget that Africans themselves were the direct abductors of their fellow blacks and sold off to the white man as slaves in exchange for some money, a British man argued. What then will be done to the slave sales rep? This was a good point if you ask me. He said the British didn't abduct the blacks but struck a deal with blacks to abduct and sell their fellow blacks to the British colonial masters, a point from the British. There have been a series of sensitive topics in the UK lately, particularly those related to colonialism and slavery, has been a contentious issue for many years. The black community persists. Recently, there have been renewed calls for the United Kingdom to provide financial compensation to Nigeria and other Western African countries for its role in the transatlantic slave trade and colonial exploitation. However, many Nigerians are opposed to the idea of receiving reparation money from the UK, and for good reason. The mindset of Nigerians. When Nigerians say they don't want money from the UK, it's not because we are not aware of the historical injustices that were perpetrated against their ancestors, or because we do not believe that the UK has a moral obligation to make amends. Rather, it's because we know that any money received from the UK will not benefit the ordinary Nigerian, but rather line the pockets of a privileged few. The favored ethnic group will end up with all the money. One of the primary reasons why Nigerians do not want reparation money from the UK is that we know that it will not be distributed fairly. In Nigeria, there is a long history of ethnic favoritism, where certain regions and groups receive preferential treatment over others. This is often justified by claims that certain regions are poorer or less privileged and higher in number than others. However, this narrative has been used to justify the unequal distribution of resources for decades, and we know that it will be used again to justify the unequal distribution of reparation money. Since 1960, the Nigerian government has prioritized the development of certain regions over others, with the justification that these regions are more in need of assistance. However, this has only led to the concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a few individuals and groups, while the majority of Nigerians remain impoverished. We know that if reparation money is received from the UK, it will be used to further entrench these inequalities, rather than to benefit the ordinary Nigerian. The problem of identifying descendant slaves. Another reason why Nigerians do not want reparation money from the UK is that it will be impossible to identify the true descendants of slaves. The transatlantic slave trade was a brutal and devastating period in our history, and it is estimated that millions of Nigerians were forcibly taken from their homes and sold into slavery. However, since the direct slaves are all dead and gone, it will be impossible to determine who their true descendants are. This will lead to a situation where everyone claims to be a descendant of slaves, including families whose ancestors were themselves slave traders. The inability to determine who is truly eligible for compensation will lead to chaos and confusion, and will ultimately result in the money being used for projects that will supposedly benefit the general public, rather than the specific individuals who are owed reparations. The money will be mismanaged and unaccounted for. Finally, Nigerians do not want reparation money from the UK because we know that it will be mismanaged and unaccounted for. In Nigeria, there is a long history of mismanagement of public funds with impunity, and we know that any money received from the UK will be no exception. A privileged few will sit on the money until it can no longer be accounted for, and then anyone who tries to hold them accountable will face the wrath of the law. This is not a hypothetical scenario. It has happened many times before in Nigeria. We have seen it with the mismanagement of oil revenues, the mismanagement of foreign aid, and the mismanagement of public funds. We know that if reparation money is received from the UK, it will be used to further enrich a privileged few, rather than to benefit the ordinary Nigerian. There are unbelievable but true stories of animals accused of stealing public funds in Nigeria. People using outrageous sums of money for the most insensitive projects, like using billions of public funds in Naira to furnish a beautiful government house. Government officials mismanage public funds with impunity. In conclusion, Nigerians do not want reparation money from the UK because we know that it will not benefit ordinary Nigerians and will end up dishonoring the memories of the enslaved. We need to work towards creating a more just and equitable society, where resources are distributed fairly, where everyone has access to the same opportunities, and public offices are not seen as a get-rich-quick scheme.